one basic element of this new agreement is the extension of the definition of hate speech. The agreement wants to criminalize migration speech. Criticism of migration will become a criminal offense. And media outlets, and that also concerns you, that give room to criticism of migration can be shut down. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, dear guests, it's nice to have you here on our Strasbourg press conference. And I would like to say some words on the Global Compact on Migration. On the 10th and 11th of December, there will be an international congress in Marrakesh, Morocco, with regard to this Global Compact on Migration. And the participating countries are set to sign this agreement. And although this joint agreement isn't binding, it's still meant to be the legal framework on which the participating countries commit themselves to build new legislation. And one basic element of this new agreement is the extension of the definition of hate speech. The agreement wants to criminalize migration speech. Criticism of migration will become a criminal offense. And media outlets, and that also concerns you, that give room to criticism of migration can be shut down. The Compact for Migration is legalization of mass migration. It's declaring migration as a human right. So in fact, it will become impossible to criticize Ms. Merkel's welcome migrants politics without being at risk to be jailed for hate speech. So this agreement, to our humble opinion, is a coup d'etat of pro-migrant liberal globalists. And it will greatly benefit multinationals. Because, you know, countries who import the third world will become the third world. And it's absolutely clear, and you all know that in third world countries, multinationals dictate the rules. It will become impossible to state that integration of migrants from Islamic countries in Western cultures is impossible. It will become impossible to mention the fact that mass migration deteriorates the Western welfare systems and the fact that mass migration leads to explosive surge of rape and murder. And this makes the timing of the Compact on Migration significant as we are heading towards elections of the European Parliament next year. With this treaty, the EU member states and the European Commission are destroying the political level playing field. It allows them to cut funding of migration critical political parties and silencing the political opposition. And to me, I would like to state this very clearly, the Tommy Robinson case in the UK is the first example to be set, and it will be an example that will follow, and probably during the elections, based on the Global Compact on Migration. So, that means the conclusion can already be that European Parliament elections will be rigged. And only the United States of America, Australia and Hungary have indicated not to sign this agreement. So we herewith urge every country that opposes mass migration to reject this compact. Thank you.
Oui, merci.
Yeah, thanks, Marcel. I think the question before us right now is quite a significant one because the UN has as a declared objective to act for peace and stability in the world. And you see that they've moved wholly outside the ambit of that role, and they're multiplying actions right now to defend globalist propaganda, specifically in terms of promoting massive immigration towards the European continent. That's why in March 2000, that's almost more than 18 years ago, a UN report said that in order to fill the demographic holes in Europe, they needed 59 million migrants arriving in Europe by 2025. Well, we can possibly rejoice that this objective has not been reached. However, you can see that their idea is to organize massive migration in this direction. The declaration in 2016, the declaration in New York, related to two things. First of all, the Pact of Refugees, which has been a subject here in the European Parliament. The European Parliament wanted to even go further than the UN Pact a few months ago. And the text that has been referred to by Marcel de Graaf, the Global Compact on Migration, the objective of which is to make migration, the right migration, to be a new human right. And that has found echo in what Jacques Attali said. You know, he was the councillor of François Mitterrand, Sarkozy, a number of French presidents, in other words, and also he was the spiritual father of Macron, Jacques Attali, who wrote a book called The Nomad, the man nomad. He arrived in Riyadh yesterday for Davos in the desert, and yet which has been boycotted by many people, and yet Jacques Attali, writer of The Man, the Nomad, has nonetheless gone to Riyadh, despite the fact that Mr. Khashoggi was murdered in particularly barbaric fashion on the orders of Riyadh. Furthermore, okay, you've got this UN wish and the European Commission as well. They're also telling us here in the hemicycle, here in Strasbourg, that they wish to restrict illegal immigration, but how? And they want to promote legal migration, as if you had to choose between one and the other. Indeed, one, it's not a zero-sum game, one is added to the other, and it's extremely difficult to control this anarchistic crossing of borders right now. Legal immigration is promoted by the European institutions. One commissioner said immigration was a moral imperative and also an economic imperative, a social imperative for our aging continent. So these are two prongs which are being developed by the UN and by EU. What's the moral argument? Well, they're war victims. A lot of them aren't fleeing conflict zones, but difficult economic situations. And the economic argument is, of course, that we will need this immigration here in Europe. Well, these are false news arguments. We are undermining what we're doing. We are brain draining their elites. And we are making that these people and our own people don't feel at home in their own homes and their own territories according to their homegrown values and customs. Of course this undermines things generally. And we are depriving ourselves of the means and capacities of doing anything over in their countries, because the cost of migration, which it's almost unlawful to try to estimate now, but it's tens of billions of euros. We cannot spend that money twice, and we can't spend that money in the countries at the source of migration. Of course, paying that aid has to be conditional on the mastery of migration flows towards Europe. So the demographic argument and obviously this idea of underpinning birth rates here in the European Union where it's too low and giving more money to families, of course, would enable us to renew generations without supporting those in favour of this massive migration. Of course, the UN's report is very worrying, but at the same time, I believe the credibility of the UN in migration questions has been seriously undermined. You can see that Trump has said he's not going to sign the pact. We have heard declarations of different heads of government, Hungary, Poland and Austria, saying that they weren't going to sign the pact either. And let me wind up by saying that the United Nations organization seems to be wholly colonized by those arguing in favor of Islam. Why do I say that? Well, recently the UN has asked France to abrogate its 2004 legislation saying that you can't wear a burqa on the grounds that it is undermining human rights. And yet, we know that why do people wear burqas in the public? It's either worn by women who are suffering pressure from their surroundings, their family, or making a religious statement. One of these two reasons. In other words, it's not really a question of choice unless it is. So the UN is interfering increasingly in national policies which are wholly within the ambit of national sovereignty. They are globalist.
You must.
Thank you. I'll speak Dutch. Yeah, I've got 1 minute, which I want to add a few things to that. In the beginning of, or spring of 2018, there was a minor incident in Flanders. Theo Frank, the State Secretary for Migration, and Jan Jan Bon, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, said that they would sign the compact on migration in Morocco. They kept it pretty secret. They're playing the cards very close to their chest. However, when it came out, there was a rather lively debate. First of all, Theo Franken, who is a bit like Berlusconi in Italy, and he said that he was against migration, but given that he wanted to sign the migration compact in Marrakesh, you could see that he was aligning himself with the migration policy of the EU. Frank was defending things that it was all done behind the screens, and the fact that the statement actually wasn't secret at all. It could be found on the website of the Maltese government, which of course put the cat among the pigeons in Flanders. Now, working together in the ENF group is very important in order to ensure that we can slow down things and ensure that we can reform migration policy within the EU as they intend to promote it. Matteo Salvini clearly is saying the right things, and there are those who feel that more moderate parties than us will resolve the issue, but that is not the issue. We need a new migration policy, and that's what we're going to have to look to in 2019.
State your name and your press agency. Go ahead.
Good morning, Angela Mauro, Huffington Post, Italy. You just said Matteo Salvini says right things on immigration. My question is about the right. Okay, so I understood well. My question is about the budget law. Today, the European Commission is going to reject the Italian draft budgetary plan, and the question is, do you support also the request of flexibility which the Italian authorities have presented to the European Commission, and Salvini is well supporting this request? Thanks.
Well, budgetary policy is as a whole rejected by us. It is a mean to keep the Eurozone stable, or to try to keep it stable, but the principle of a one size, one measure, one social economic policy over all over the European Union has always been rejected by us. So, of course, I'm very well placed to support the flexibility demand of Italy, because Belgium also does. Apart from Italy, Belgium is asking for flexibility. Mr. Juncker says there is no reason for it. So I'm very surprised to hear that the request has been rejected by saying everything is all right in Belgium. Everything is not all right in Belgium. And so what we reject is the EU policy within the Eurozone. Making one economic zone is a failure, is a fake try to create this European state, which we reject entirely and principally.